Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Those who are present here on the Google Meet, those who are on Facebook, and those who are on YouTube. So, we welcome all the participants here. I think there is some noise coming, so everybody should mute. I think Professor Ghosh. Uh, so, we welcome. This is yet another initiative by University of Teachers here who are there. I welcome the research scholars. I welcome the students. I humbly welcome the students because when I was a student, in what capacity I'm here today is that I was a student of Allahabad University way back in '86, and teachers. So when Mr. Ghosh, sorry, I'm in a corporate world, alliance insurance broker, so Mr. comes out very easily to be. So when Professor Ghosh told me that, Shishir, why don't we arrange something like this as we have been arranging? So I scouted around the world wherever I could, and I could lay my hands on a very sweet gentleman called Homagni Choudhury. More of it, Professor Ghosh would be telling you. But I'm also we have a very strong alumni association in Allahabad University economics department, and I happen to be one of the members of that executive council there. And we have been doing pretty decent job on the fraternity. Those ex-students of Allahabad University, I would really urge, I would take this forum just a couple of seconds, that wherever you are, please bring back the glory of Allahabad, bring back that glory. And I could see a lot of smiling faces on that. I could see a lot of smiling faces on that. So Professor Ghosh has started this initiative, and there are a lot of initiatives which he has started. So it is one such initiative. And we have also, from the Alumni Association, we have also conducted one of the seminars. This is the second where he asked me to do it, and I did it. I'm doing it for him today. So with these kind words, today it's really a pleasure for me to host this. I belong to a corporate world. I don't know. I have forgotten everything of even I cannot pronounce economics properly today. Spelling to मैं बोल ही नहीं पाऊंगा. So I don't know much about economics, but yes, I do love economics, and I do love the Department of Economics, which has made us where we are today. And ladies and gentlemen, kids, boys and girls, we have people from different time zones. I could see people from UK, then there was a gentleman from South Africa, then Malaysia. Then I could, of course, Kingston के Professor साहब आज बोल भी रहे हैं. So we have people from different time zones. That shows what J.K. Mehta did once. Professor Ghosh is taking it further. Professor Ghosh is taking it further, and it is my honor duty to really be a part of that. To really be, and I really feel privileged that he has chosen me as one of being one of his parts. So, ladies and gentlemen, with these words, I would invite Professor Ghosh to open it and say a few words.
Very much, Shishir, for starting the session. And hello, everyone, and welcome to today's web session of the e-forum, Economics Speak. On the behalf of the Department of Economics, University of Allahabad, India, and on my own behalf, I extend a very warm welcome to all who have joined us today from different countries. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here with us for today's academic program. This is the third edition of our Economics Speak e-forum, and I extend and consider it a great honor and privilege to welcome and introduce the distinguished speaker of the third episode of our e-forum Economics Speak, Dr. Homagni Choudhury. Dr. Choudhury is currently head of economics department at Kingston University, London. He has completed his education from India and UK, I think mostly. He has a strong background in academia with research and teaching experience in a wide range of topics in economics and allied areas, labor, productivity, industrial, and regional economics. For his remarkable contribution in the academic field, he has received many prestigious global awards and grants. Today, Dr. Choudhury will present his views covered in the topic, A Tale of Two Indias. Are the best living behind the rest? The study uses a statistic convergence framework to examine regional income disparity in India, covering a period of more than past 50 years. Although the analysis is country specific, but the canvas of the issue is much wider. Income inequality is a widespread concern, not only for emerging markets and developing countries, but also for most of advanced countries also. This phenomenon receives considerable attention. The former US President Barack Obama called widening income inequality the defining challenge of our time. Widening income inequality has also significant implication for growth and macroeconomic stability. Inequality affects growth drivers and hampers poverty reduction. Equality, like fairness, irrespective of ideology, culture, and religion, people care about inequality. They are both concerned about it. The United Nations has also given focus on the issue of inequality, and its Sustainable Development Goal number 10 aims to reduce inequality within and among countries. Therefore, I hope that today's presentation will not only focus the inequality within the countries, among the states, but also among the countries. I'm sure that today's presentation by Dr. Choudhury will certainly expand the understanding of this crucial contemporary challenge. With these few words, I hand over the responsibility to Sri Sandeepan to proceed further. Sri Sandeepan, please.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh. Thank you so much for laying the context of the speech today. And ladies and gentlemen, I promise that I would be ending the session in 1 hour. And so would I be requesting Homagni to do it within 1 hour. How we have structured is after the presentation of Dr. Homagni, we would be taking few questions from you guys. And those questions should come on chatbot not. It should come on chat screen, which comes on your right hand corner of your screen. So you can put your questions there to Homagni or to Professor Ghosh if you want his views. And we would be, time permits, we would be taking few questions. Now, without wasting much of your time, over to Dr. Homagni Choudhury.
Lovely welcome and for the lovely introduction. I think I'll start by thanking both of you for giving me this opportunity to share some of our ongoing work on regional income convergence, focusing on India. And this is a work in progress, so we are delighted to have this opportunity to share some of our provisional results and to perhaps get some feedback and questions that would make this study a little bit more robust in terms of how we take it forward. I'm also delighted to see this I think initiative. This is a great initiative taken by Department of Economics in Allahabad University, where you are connecting people from different parts of the world with a focus on connecting with the alumni, but also it's structured in a way that it benefits your current students and wider stakeholders of the university. So I think it is really commendable that what the initiative taken forward by Professor Ghosh and Mr. Sandipan. So I really congratulate both of you on this initiative. So I think without any further ado, what I'll try to do, as Mr. Sandipan has explained, we'll try to keep it within an hour. So perhaps I'm going to speak for 30 minutes or so. Is that okay? And then we can take questions. Fantastic. To share my screen with you. If you bear with me. Right. So is my screen visible to everyone? Can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So without any further ado, I think I'll start. What we are going to talk about is a story of regional income convergence in India, and we have titled it "A Tale of Two Indias: Are the Best Leaving Behind the Rest?" And it's an open-ended question, which I think we have not fully answered, but we would like to seek your views on what our findings are. And this is a joint work with one of our doctoral scholars in the department, Zoltan Laszlo Kopachi. So I think to start with, I'll give you a little bit of a background to the study. I've been working on the area of regional economics for a while. I mean, obviously, I think the reforms of India in the 1990s and all the major economic changes we have seen in the 2000s and in the recent times, I think make it very interesting to look at the distributional effects of such reforms and policy changes. And one of this distributional effect is to look at basically aspects of regional inequality, which is, I think, very important, as emphasized by Professor Koch right at the beginning. So we have been working on this area to kind of link how the economic reforms historically have affected the regional income distribution in India. And to this effect, we wrote a conference paper in 2014, which is basically a precursor to our current work, looking at stochastic convergence of incomes in India. And currently, we have got this doctoral candidate in our department, Zoltan, who is working on the convergence hypothesis and the spatial distribution of economic activity in India. So some of these results are part of that study, which we are again, trying to conceptualize in terms of wider regional economics and business and management studies. So we are working with colleagues in Hull as well. And one of the papers that recently came out with colleagues in Hull is this Journal of Business Ethics 2019 paper, where basically this is a screenshot of the paper which has already been published. And this is a similar kind of regional income convergence framework, testing for stochastic convergence in the northeastern states of India. So we looked at the 7 states in the northeast. And then we try to kind of understand that using what we call as a political market orientation framework. So we are now very much interested to kind of, extend this published piece of work to an all India level. And in doing that, we are testing for stochastic convergence in per capita incomes for India, and that is what today's presentation is going to be all about. So for this purpose, what I have done is give justice to the time that we have. I think my focus will be more on the intuitive and the analytical parts of our study, rather than going into some of the more technical details of the study. So in some of those slides, I'll skip those slides. But to start with, we start with some, I think, stylized facts, which kind of contextualizes what we are trying to do and kind of justifies the motivation that we have. I think as this audience will know very well that economic growth in India had picked up since the mid-1980s, and there's a lot of evidence on that in terms of the turnaround in growth for the Indian economy. However, what we also observe empirically is that the growth in incomes per capita, in before the mid-1980s, roughly averaged 1.5%, and this, because of this turnaround in the mid-1980s, we find that growth per capita, so this is growth of incomes per capita, accelerated to on an average 4.5% between 1985 and 2014. Obviously, if we look at the period in the 90s, in the 2000s, then growth, average growth was also averaging around 7 to 8 to 9% at times. So we clearly see a divide in economic growth in the mid-1980s. However, the problem is at the national level, this looks all very nice and positive and encouraging. But if we try to dissect this at the level of individual states, then we see that states, big states like Gujarat, Haryana, Maharashtra, Punjab have performed the 1985 to 2014 period with average growth rates above 5.5% for these states. While there are other states like Assam, Bihar, UP, and if you look at these states, then their average growth rates have been much lesser, 2.5% at times on average, or even lesser than that. And this has attracted attention of the academic scholars, and people have used different frameworks in terms of interstate relations, in terms of differences in so forth. However, there has been no conclusive evidence to kind of understand what has been the long run trend in terms of convergence of growth rates for these states. So this then kind of this kind of motivates us to compare India's experience with the Chinese experience, where I think in the Chinese experience, it's again very well documented that geographical factors have played a very important factor in terms of explaining, and we can see, especially in China, if you look at the southern provinces, which are south and the southeastern provinces, which are closer to the ports, so obviously economic activity picked up on those states, and they have performed much better than the north and the northwestern provinces, and it's quite well documented in the literature. So economic geography plays a very important factor to explain this variation in China. However, in India, what we find is there's been no clear evidence in terms of correlation between physical geography and regional economic performance. Landlocked states like Punjab and Haryana have historically done very well, and states which are closer to ports, Orissa and West Bengal, have had relatively weaker economic performance. Obviously, if we bring in the other, political economy factors, for instance, variation in labor institutions, variation in terms of investments and infrastructures in the state, we need to bring all of those into factor rather than simply thinking in terms of physical geography. So we are interested in this, and we ask the question, what explains the variance in economic performance of states in India? And our broader aim is to look at the interaction between economic geography and political economic factors. So that is what we aim to achieve in terms of the work we are doing. However, what we are doing today is to kind of set the scene for our ongoing work. And we start with the question, are there two Indias? So we start by giving you a snapshot of two different snapshots starting in 1960. And in 1960, if we look at the average income per capita, and these are all real prices. If I recall correctly, I think this is in 2003-4 prices. So we can see that the mean income per capita in India was about 7,380 rupees. The richest state, so in terms of individual, average income in Delhi was about 14,000 Indian rupees, which was 4 times higher that of the Arunachal Pradesh, which is not surprising, Delhi being the capital city, right being at the center, and Arunachal Pradesh being in a remote corner of India. Such differences are not surprising. If we look at the top 5 states in 1960, again, big states like Delhi, Maharashtra, Punjab, Haryana top the charts in terms of incomes per capita. And smaller states like Arunachal, Orissa, Tripura, Bihar, Manipur were at the bottom. Now we fast forward this by 55 years from 1960 to 2014, and we see that mean income per capita has increased by almost 7 times, between 6 and 7 times, to 48,000 rupees. Delhi still remains the top state, and Bihar is now at the bottom, and Delhi's income per capita was 6 times that of Bihar in 2014. In terms of the ranking, again, we don't see a lot of change. The top 5, more or less, you see the same states appearing in the bottom 5, more or less, you have the same states appearing. So that's why we are trying to ask this question, like whether, states which have been doing reasonably well even before the reforms, have they always been performing better than the other states, or has there been any catch-up? We also provide you some time series evidence here. So the middle curve here, the blue curve here that you see, this is the mean per capita income, and we see that it has grown almost exponentially in level terms from between 1960 and 2040. Obviously, we also provide you the standard deviation, so it shows that the variation of state incomes per capita has also increased over time. And if we control for the mean, then the top curve here is our coefficient of variance, and even the coefficient of variance is showing a positive trend, kind of indicating that richer states have become richer, poorer states have remained poor, and that's why the regional divide, or in terms of interstate inequality, has increased in India. This is based in terms of very summary statistics. Obviously, whether there is a statistical evidence for that is what we are trying to test in this current work. So with that as the context, our question is, are the best living behind the rest? The broader aim of our work is to understand what are the factors behind variance in regional economic performance. That understanding is important to kind of reduce, or at least suggest policy recommendations that could address regional income inequality aspects. In today's presentation, however, we want to present some of our results on the income convergence hypothesis. And in doing that, we use a stochastic convergence framework, which is basically a time series framework that kind of builds on the current existing work, kind of addressing some of the issues in the existing work. So obviously, most of income convergence studies normally use the cross-sectional approach, while our contribution here is that we use a more recent time series approach, and we test for whether there is evidence of stochastic convergence. So in doing that, I think I'm going to skip this slide because I think this audience is very much familiar with the economic reform story in India. And generally for an international audience, I think I would explain the different phases of economic reforms and policy changes in India. But to very briefly put it, we saw inward-looking import substitution, industrialization policies in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. In the 80s, there was some attempt to carry out reforms, which have been characterized as more pro-business rather than pro-market. And then we all know what happened in 1991 with the IMF-induced structural reforms and macroeconomic reforms. India saw large-scale liberalization, targeting both the external sector, domestic industry concerns. Although I think the debate on whether labor market reforms have taken place has continued still even today, and I can spend almost half a day, one day, on the labor market reforms. So that is another area that we can discuss at a different time. And with that background of the reforms in India, I wanted to very quickly touch on what are the theoretical predictions of why we expect differentials in income per capita across states. And without, again, going into technical details, because I want this to be more accessible to both undergraduate students and youth, you can either approach it from a competitive perspective, and then you can use the theory of compensating differentials, or you can use ideas kind of imbibed in unobserved heterogeneity to explain why there is interstate income per capita differentials. Or you can completely come from a non-competitive approach, a very political economy perspective, and you can look at policy environment and how there is variation in policy environment, variation in economic geography, variation in political economic factors, and then explain interstate income per capita differentials. I think in terms of the empirical background itself, so if we look at the wider literature that has focused on testing for regional income convergence in India, there is a huge volume of studies that have kind of looked at this or some aspect of convergence. We have a strand of studies that kind of indicate that the reforms in the 80s and 90s have benefited all states, but equally we have a strand of studies that provide evidence for increasing regional disparities. And then we have a volume of studies which provide evidence on conditional convergence. Basically, it's a debate that has been ongoing, and on whether there is evidence for income convergence within India or not. I think there are gaps in the literature that we need to highlight. So majority of the studies that we have used, that we have reviewed, and some of which we also listed in our previous slide, majority of them use a cross-sectional growth equation approach. And I think it is quite established now that there are limitations in this approach in that we assume that all regions that we are talking about have the same steady state, and they have a uniform growth distribution. And this is kind of challenged by the time series framework, and that's why people try to use a stochastic convergence framework, where they're basically allowing that each state is different from the other state, and they have their own steady state path, and hence it is a more superior way of looking at income convergence rather than using the cross-sectional growth approach. So we take that into account. We have done this in our previous paper as well in 2014. So our current paper is basically an extension of that. because again, it depends on the kind of testing methodology you are using, whether you're allowing for structural breaks or not. And this is what the main contribution of our current paper is. But rather than going into the technicalities of it, I want to present a more intuitive explanation of what we would expect theoretically, right? So this is kind of the a priori expectation, and whether this is reflected in the data or not is what we are testing for. And the framework we have is that we are saying that before the 90s, it was a highly protected economy, and obviously there is evidence that the distortions has always been in terms of the biggest states. So if we can think of states as units themselves, as units of analysis, then we can think of that the states, the bigger states, towards which policy was much more focused on, were able to generate state rents, and hence these states will have higher incomes per capita, and therefore differences in incomes per capita in the closed economy perspective would tend to reflect differences in effects of policy. But in the post-90s, there has been opening up of the market, and as a result, especially because industrial delicensing took place, and all the reservations of industries and locational reservations were all removed, so fall, and hence if state rents would fall, we are not saying that there would be an absolute convergence of incomes, but at least the state should converge towards their compensating differentials, which would be their basically equilibrium differentials. And that's why what we are saying is that a priori, we would expect that liberalization, which targeted both product and factor markets, would result in conditional convergence of the interstate incomes per capita. So that is what we are trying to test for. Now, do we find that in the results is what we are going to present next. So in doing so, the empirical strategy we follow, again, I think, we have followed a very standard methodology suggested by Kalino and Mills. So we start with a relative income series. So think of a variable YT. So it's a time series variable. It's a relative income series. On the numerator, we have the real state domestic product per capita. So RSDPPC is real state domestic product per capita. So that is the state domestic product, if you like. And on the denominator, we have the average state domestic product per capita. Now there are different ways of kind of measuring this average. People take simply the national average. People sometimes take, you take the simple average of the states that you have in your sample. In our case, we have taken the population weighted because obviously, larger states will have larger capacity to produce incomes per capita, and therefore we have weighted it by populations. And what we are doing is now, for sake of time, I'm going to skip some slides here because this is all described in Kalino and Mills. What we are interested is whether YT is stationary or not. So YT is our relative income series. And if you can see in this equation, basically we are testing for whether that rho, the coefficient on YT minus 1, is 1 or not. This is important. This is very important from a stochastic convergence framework, is that if our series is not stationary, if rho is 1, then any shock we have, any external shock, so you can think of the current COVID-19 as an external shock, or you can think of the financial crisis of 2008 as a shock. So if any shock kind of affects your relative income series, then it's going to stay permanently if this rho is 1, right? So it will have a permanent effect on the series, on the long time series, rather than a transitory effect. So there will be basically in economics terms, there will be no mean reversion, and if there is no mean reversion, this would kind of reflect as if there is a divergence from this steady state. So this is what we are using in our empirical strategy. Very simple framework, very simple strategy, and it's basically we are testing for stochastic convergence by looking for a unit root in our relative time series for incomes per capita. Okay, then in the methodology we have used the whole range of tests. I think undergraduate students would be very familiar with the augmented Dickey-Fuller test. So postgraduate students will be familiar with some of the other tests that we have used. And if you have worked on time series methods, then you'll be familiar with lots of these tests. But to keep things simple, think of a relative income series. We are using an ADF test to test for stationarity. If the series is stationary, we conclude that there is evidence for stochastic convergence. If the series is not stationary, then we are concluding that there is evidence for divergence. Okay, what we are doing is basically our innovation has been to be able to use all these different kinds of tests. And the good thing is that we have also been able to incorporate for structural breaks, because it's quite established in the literature that if there are structural breaks and these are ignored in the unit root testing methodology, then we might erroneously conclude that there is non-stationary, then it might be stationary with breaks. So we address that problem and we use this Lee and Strajicek tests, which allow for 1 and 2 structural breaks. But not only that, we go beyond that, and we use panel unit root tests as well, taking into account for problems related with cross-section dependence problem, heterogeneity problem, and again panel unit root tests with and without breaks. So again, I don't want to go into the details of the technical details of this test for the sake of time. But the idea is, I think that the main idea that we are emphasizing is we are starting off with the relative income series. Remember, numerator is state domestic product, denominator is the national state domestic product. So we are basically saying that each state is converging towards this national average, and that relative, it has its own steady state. So the main important thing that this builds on, that deviates from the more standard cross-sectional way of looking at convergence is they assume that there is the same steady state for each state. But we are allowing the states to be heterogeneous, and each state is having a different steady state, and that's what we are testing in this different kinds of unit root tests. So the data we use is all official data. So we focus on 20 states for 55 years, and this accounts for 80% of the population of India, 80% of India's GDP, and these are all real data. These are in 2004-5 prices. I think earlier I mentioned 2003-4, so that was my mistake. So apologies for that. So our base year is 2004. So these are all real incomes per capita. And generally I would present this map to give an idea of how the different disclaimer. This is the first map I get from Google. So again, I cannot confirm any national or international borders are correctly depicted here. But this is just to give you an idea of the rough idea of the different locations of the state for those who are not familiar with the Indian states. And then we go into presenting our results. Now, please don't get upset with so many tables here. So what we have is we have two variables. When we are looking at incomes per capita, so our measure of income per capita is state domestic product for India, right? So this is basically GDP, but for the states, the state domestic product. And this is reported in both net and gross. So for robustness, we've done the test on both net and gross of this, right? I'll spend just a little bit of time on the ADF test for the sake of the undergraduate students, so that they understand what we are trying to do. So you can see, if you see for Andhra Pradesh here, we have a test statistic which is statistically significant at the 5% level. So basically, we are saying that we are rejecting the unit root null for Andhra Pradesh, which means we find evidence of stochastic convergence for incomes per capita for Andhra Pradesh, right? The ones which do not have stars, basically, we cannot reject the null. And what we find with the ADF test is that there are only a certain handful of states that show that there is evidence for convergence. So if you understand the first column here, the ADF test, so basically we repeat the same thing with different kinds of tests to see whether we get similar results or not. And again, for the sake of time, now I'm going to skip some of these slides because same story. So the next slide is the same test but with gross state domestic product, and we find not a lot of evidence of stochastic convergence. Then we allow for one structural break in the testing procedure, and again we find not significant evidence in stochastic convergence. And then we do that for the gross series as well and the net series as well. Then again, I go one step forward and I allow two structural breaks, and you can see these breaks are being reported here for both the net series and the gross series. And our more preferred tests are the Lee and Strajicic tests. And when we allow for the structural breaks, then we find more overwhelming evidence of stochastic convergence. So we do the same for the gross series and the net series. And after that, we move to the panel unit root tests. And again, we find overwhelming evidence of stochastic convergence. And we do these tests with both breaks and without incorporating breaks. And I'm skipping through all these for the sake of time, because I think what I want to focus on is basically the key results, right? So the key findings we have is that we do find evidence of stochastic convergence when we allow for structural breaks, even in the panel unit root test. And this is significant. This is significant because it means that if there is any kind of exogenous shocks, then they do not have a permanent income on the relative income series. So there is mean reversion, which means for each state, they come back to their steady state, to their long run steady state, right? So, if you extend this study and say in 10 years time, if we have long time series data, we can also look at whether COVID-19 had such kind of permanent or transitory effect. And if you allow for structural breaks, then we might think of COVID-19 as a structural break rather than the series being non-mean reverting. What is though interesting for us is the break dates itself, because we started by hypothesizing that we would expect the break dates to be in the 1980s and the 1990s, coinciding with the reforms, right? Now, this has not been the case because we find, the break dates, because we allow up to 2 structural breaks in each series, and we find that the break dates, vary. Some of these break dates are in 1970s and even in late 1960s, which kind of, again, signifies, the heterogeneous nature of states and the importance of going back to understand the history, the specific history, culture, politics of that state, what was going on during that time. Now, we have not correlated that yet, so that is something which is kind of work in progress. We'll have to look at each state's history and kind of why these break dates are occurring, because we have allowed the break dates to be endogenous. So in that sense, these results are quite significant. However, there is a word of caution, and the caution is this is only half the story. The other part of the story is that we need to still test for beta convergence. Even though these are significant results, our preliminary test results show that beta convergence in those series where we find evidence for stochastic convergence quite weak. It reduces from 20 states to only about a third of the states, but I'm not presenting those results because those are still preliminary results. So I think those are the key findings. And to conclude, I think the way forward would be for any of you who are interested in this kind of work, you may want to kind of look at policymaking processes and convergence results. So kind of conceptualizing such results. For example, the political market orientation. If you are interested in the more technical aspects of things, then you might want to look at the stochastic convergence framework itself. And as I said, this is only half the story. So what about beta convergence? So kind of addressing methodological issues, determinants of structural breaks. So this is something we are very interested, going back to economic geography factors, political economic factors. So we'll have to read up the history of the states in order to understand the structural breaks better. And obviously, I think there is a lot of data available in India these days. So if you want to focus on the manufacturing sector itself and look at cross-state performance of the manufacturing sector, then you can use very sophisticated panel data sets. So I think this is where I would conclude. So thank you for your attention. I hope this kind of generates some interest for you in this area. And if you are students, we work in Kingston on these areas. So you're most welcome to come and speak to us. And if you want to pursue some of these courses in Kingston, we would be very happy to have a discussion. So thank you very much. I think I will pass it on over to Professor Ghosh and Mr. Sandeepan.
Oops. That's really very interesting, Dr. Homagni. I still remember when I was a student, I would never attend the class of Professor Jan or Professor Pawar just because of this methodology which you people deploy. I was wondering for those 40 or 30, 35 odd minutes when we spoke, whether I was sitting in an economics class or a chemistry class. So many experiments getting done. But my friends from the university see what we are doing. It's a very good learning for all of us. That being what they are doing today. So at Allahabad, I am pretty sure under the leadership of Mr. Ghosh, Professor Ghosh, we are doing some wonderful research papers as well. And I would take this opportunity to also request Dr. Homagni, though he has already graciously agreed to this, that there are scholars I know when we interact during our interactions with the scholars, they are doing regional inequalities. So I mean, allow them to come to you, allow them to speak to you, allow them and help them out, so that they also move. I would request Dr. Homagni to do it. We have
absolutely.
Yeah,
I think people are absolutely welcome to contact us, and that's why I said if you are interested, and I left with some very open-ended issues. So if people are interested to work on those areas, then we would be very happy to have them on board.
Okay, that's great. I have a very interesting, I don't know whether it is a naive question from my side, maybe because of my understanding, but there is a gentleman in the name of Devesh. He told a very beautiful thing. He blames all this inequality. I don't know where does it fit into your determinants, but he tells one very beautiful thing, that he blames the entire, at least the part of this inequality to the people of India. He says that from 2011, there has not been even a single dharna, morcha on development. So that is, I don't know whether does it fit into your canvas or not, I don't know. But that's an interesting chat which I had. So Homagni, would you like to really?
Yes, absolutely. I think that is a very interesting observation. I think when we are studying inequalities, I think what happens in mainstream economics and I am no exception to that. Sometimes we get carried away by the methodologies, by the data, and the technicalities and the rigor of things. But I think what happens is sometimes we forget that economic processes or economic questions are embedded in social processes, and this social processes would kind of reflect on what we have, what kind of cultural background and thought processes we have, and it is very much important to kind of therefore supplement quantitative analysis with qualitative analysis, going to the ground root, grassroots, and interviewing people and using some of these qualitative methods. Fair point. That
Yeah. Pallavi has a very rudimentary question, but I would like to ask, where does she get the investment data? I don't know what does it mean, but investment data कहाँ से मिलेगा?
I think it would depend on at what level you are looking at. So for national level data, I think most of the data comes from CSO and MSSO. So you should be able to get national level statistics without much problems. If you want it at manufacturing level, at state levels, again, I think the best place to look for it is CSO to start with. But perhaps we can, if you have specific questions on what investment series you are looking for, then please feel free to email me, and then we'll be able to. I'll be happy to discuss that.
That's great. One question for Professor Ghosh. One of the participants, this is Dhwani Priyaranjan Datta Gupta. He is asking for the feedback link. I don't know if there is a provision. Please, you should.
So so what I understand is basically it's the spillovers from one state to another. So if you are if there is proximity of states, obviously if there are good things happening in Bihar, then there will be some spillover of it to so forth. So yes, because of this, there is what we call as cross-sectional dependence, right? And if we do not kind of account for this, then all these test results that we have shown would be a bit misleading. So our panel unit group this kind of addresses or attempts to address that cross-sectional dependence problem by using those particular tests. So I would encourage you to read up on those tests. I think it's a very valid point. The spillover effects is very important, and I think economists are trying to kind of capture that through new models on spatial distribution, right? So there is basically association and dissociation of economic activity across regions, and it's being modeled across different pieces of study.
Okay, that's very nice. Sorry, I would not be able to take further questions, but there are interesting things. Like some undergraduate student asked me, what do you mean by unabsorbed heterogeneity? So let him just do some bit of Googling on this, and then maybe that he writes to you. Paucity of time, I promised to end at in just 1 hour, and I'm exactly 3 minutes short of 1 hour. So over to Professor Ghosh for his last words and wrap up.
Thank you, Shishir. First of all, there is a query by some participant about the response. We don't have the provision of that because we have all the provision of who have already joined and who have registered. They will send a certificate to them, and we have all the data of all the participants here. So they need not fill any separate feedback form. That the provision we have already edited ourselves. Now I can see a lot of familiar faces of my students, young faculty members, and some senior professors from different parts of the country and abroad also. I would like to mention especially Professor Gyan Prakash ji from Madhya Pradesh. he is here. Professor Manisha Dubey from Chhattisgarh, she is here. And Professor K.K. Bagchi from West Bengal, who has also joined. In addition to my younger colleagues, Dr. Umesh Pratap Singh, Dr. Raju Ranjan, Dr. Babita Srivastava, and a lot of other people who have joined today, who are connected. Now, we appreciate you being here. I consider it is a great honor to propose a vote of thanks to all who have witnessed it as a memorable and resounding successful event. First of all, I would like to propose hearty vote of thanks to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Homagni Choudhury, for making excellent presentation and making this web session interesting and meaningful. My special thanks goes to two alumni of 1986 batch of Department of Economics, University of Allahabad, Mr. Shishir Sandeepan, who is very much here and who is from Mumbai as coordinator of today's event. And Professor Sangeeta Khurana, also from 86 batch of Allahabad University, now she's professor in London, and who has made this web session possible. I again extend my hearty thanks to both of you. Event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels start rolling weeks ago. My big thanks to the organizing team of the Economics Speak or event, which is the third edition of Economics Speak, and taking it further height. And finally, I extend my thanks to the wonderful participants who have turned up in such a large number, not only from India, but many other countries, a couple of countries, Sandeepan has already mentioned in his initial address. Thank you so much for showing your keen interest in this program and participation. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time again for the Forum of Economics Speak. Thank you so much, Dr. Homagni Choudhury, for accepting our request and enlightening all the listeners who have joined. I hope they will be benefited by your interpretations, and they will have keen interest in regional economics. And since you are very large-heartedly allowed them to connect with you whenever they feel good, and that is, I think, it's a teacher-like quality. And emotional. I become very emotional when such good words come from any teacher. Thank you so much, Dr. Choudhury, once again, for making this event happen. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Professor Ghosh. Thank you, Mr. Sandeepan, and thank you to all the participants as well. And as I said, please feel free to contact me if you have questions.
Thank you.
You can find my details very easily.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We come to the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.